what we're going to have a look at now is adding some shadows and also highlights to our image. And there's a couple of ways we can do this. Um, Obviously, as I've gone, I've added some shadows and highlights to particular objects, which is great if you're able to duplicate, flip them, and all that kind of stuff. But I'm going to do a manual overall fix-up of shadows and highlights. And one of the techniques we can use is, let's take this to, you can see where I've got my color fix up here. I'm going to create a new layer above there, and once again, create a clipping mask. And the big reason for that is so that only attaches to here. I want to keep the sky as a separate entity for that. I don't want to start painting shadows on the sky, and the clipping mask will push that down to our flattened complex image. And one technique which can be useful but sometimes can be a little bit messy is using a blend mode and also painting this in grey, and then using dark and light. But what I'm going to show you, what I find usually works better, is if you separate these layers into shadows and highlights. So first of all, I recommend doing the shadows, and for that, let's actually start painting this in. I'm going to select black, nice and simple for that, and nice soft brush there, and you can see I can start painting that in. Now it's a bit aggressive doing this technique. You notice I'm still using a nice soft brush to the Wacom where it kind of comes in. You can play around with blend modes for this. Something like soft light could be quite useful. It does tend to put a little bit of burn on that, but not a hell of a lot. And the other thing you can do is start playing around with the opacity. So you might want to do this in multiple passes, but as you can see, as I paint over this desert area here, is picking up a lot of the red from below and kind of making that even redder. So that will sometimes work well, but I recommend just pushing the blend modes around, and something like hard light or vivid light might actually work a little bit better, so it doesn't pick up all of that sort of dark, picking up the reds and stuff like that. So let's fix this up a little bit. Let's get myself a nice soft eraser as well while I'm doing that, and you can go through and just manually just start painting in your shadows and stuff like that. And once again, I'm using a nice soft brush for this. It's just going to be a really nice way. If the opacity is also too high, I recommend lowering that down so you actually build up gradually for this stuff. And consider where your lighting's coming from. And because this is just me throwing up some concepts, this is going to be pretty quick. I'm going to grab the lasso tool, and because I actually want to have some control over having some exact shadows as well. So if you do need to drop that in without it spreading out too far, you can. So that way I can actually manually start painting some of the stuff in. Let's bring my opacity up a little bit more, less, and so on and so forth. And you can also blur that out a little bit. There's a little blur option in here with the dodge and burn tool. Just above there is the blur tool. You can usually ramp the strength up of that quite a lot, and you can usually get a little bit of a blur happening on the edges if need be, depending on how you go. Or you can simply go to filter, blur, and Gaussian, and you can add a little bit of blur to that, because we are on the edges of stuff anyway. It's not going to matter too much, so there it is there, and you can blur as you go for there. Let's add a few more shadows in here. Switching back to brush helps, and I can just start manually figuring out where I want to put some shadows. This can be quite a complex task if you really want to get into a lot of details, but the big question you got to ask yourself as you're sort of building this stuff is how much detail do I actually need my audience to see, and if if you can get away with some stuff that it's just they're not going to even think about, then fantastic. But otherwise, see how you go. Always step back from your artwork, and if you can get on a big screen, fantastic. And when in doubt, if you create new layers, create clipping mask, great. Let's send this one to multiply. I want to see how that looks, and start painting in some stuff there, and just try some different blend modes. Soft light. Nice and subtle, nice and subtle. Once you're kind of getting the overall hang of this is really not, the most amazing work ever, but we are digging at this pretty quick. Once you have sort of got a pretty good idea of what you want the shadows to be and how they blend in, and just look at the balance of like light and dark areas. Then you also want to start looking at highlight areas. So if certain elements don't work, jump back in there. You might want to use the mask option on this and do a nice little cut back in, bring some details back. If there's, you spend a lot of time adding details, and you might find out that kills them. But it is about the overall image in the most part. So do take that into consideration. So I'm going to jump in and I'm going to start doing the same, but I'm going to add some highlights to this. So I'm going to create a new layer, right click, create clipping mask, and in this case I'm just going to switch over to white, and I'm going to start manually painting in some lighter areas just to bring some highlights up. By default this isn't going to be great because it's going to actually kill my details, so do have a look at some of the blend modes. Most of the time overlay or soft light's going to be pretty good. Once again, overlay's got kind of issue where it starts burning stuff out, but you might be able to fix that up in the end. So I'm just going to switch to soft light. You can see already we're just adding a little bit of highlights there, and that clipping mask is really going to help us out for that. And I'm going to hit a few little sections, nothing major. You can also add color to this if you really want to. If you want to add a little bit of oranges and stuff on the base or wherever, but you can sort of see how that starts popping through. Be cautious of overdoing your shadows. It can be something that can destroy your image as well. Can start looking a little bit candy-like, or really overburnt and stuff like that, which I think this one I'm doing at the moment is kind of heading that way. So I'm just trying to soften some of those in the background and all the rest of it. But that's basically it. Use those layers, use those clipping masks, and we can create some pretty cool effects for that. One other thing that I'm going to throw in, just as sort of an extra bonus, is I'm going to create another layer. Once again, clipping mask, gotta love them. It's going to stop me from painting on the sky. Is I'm going to just throw a block color in here, and it really doesn't matter what the color is. This is right on the top, and I'm not actually going to use that. I'm actually going to use a gradient overlay for this. So I'm actually going to hit gradient overlay, and I've got one that I usually use, which is a brown tan beige color, but you can actually, if you turn off your visibility here and then you go to effects, gradient overlay, you can also build your own. Photoshop's kind of got rid of that selection in the latest updates, but you can jump in, you go color, and usually what you can do is you can start picking out some colors from your environment. You can get that kind of, depending on what sort of environment. So this is kind of a desert sort of thing, and there it is there. So there's my layer, and you can see I've already got the gradient overlay happening there. And what I actually want to do is I don't want this to be filled in with whatever color that is. Could be black, could be white, could be green, blue. I want the effect to be done, so I'm going to go to fill, and I'm going to remove the fill on that. So now we've only got the gradient overlay, and the gradient overlay, you can also need to set the blend mode for that accordingly, and I usually recommend something like soft light. And as you can see, it's just done a nice little colorization that is sort of a uniformity for my image. So once again, got rid of that, and you can see there's my original image, and it's just added a nice little sort of reddy glow to that. So soft light's pretty good, and you can lower that around. But the other cool thing is, if we set this to linear, for example, I can actually move that gradient. It's a bit hard to see on this because it's quite subtle, so let's change that to something that's going to stand up, like multiply, or let's do color burn, which is going to be quite stark. So I can actually adjust that gradient by moving it up or down, or you can even rotate it from one point to the other, but keep it subtle. So let's go soft light again, and I actually do want that the other way around, like so. You can also reset alignment if you really throw it out of whack. Let's add a little bit of blue to this. Let's see how that works. So rather than that being sort of the dark red color, let's see how that looks with some blue. Other way around. This is kind of the fun part, and nice little blue tinge as we head up towards the sky. Occasionally this won't work with the dragging straight away. If that's the case, just hit OK and then go back to your gradient, double click, and now you should be able to see that moving up and down. And we can manually paint this kind of stuff in, but just adding that uniformity all the way through really does add a nice little effect. So nice little tie-in with that. And of course, as we start heading to towards the sky area, that will start popping out the reflected color off the sky and stuff like that, as opposed to the ground plane, which is mostly going to be red in this case.